Greetings, history seekers. Welcome to the very darkest chapter of human civilization. By 1200 BC, the great Bronze Age kingdoms reached the absolute peak of human power and wealth. They constructed colossal stone cities, mastered trade, and fielded mighty armies in shining bronze armor. Yet in one single generation, this magnificent world was violently burned down to the ground. Who were the mysterious sea peoples that brought these ancient empires to their knees without a warning? Imagine these coastal lands over 3,000 years ago, bathed in the golden light of prosperity. Mighty kings ruled from grand palaces, believing their eternal dynasties would never fall. Their royal chariots, plated in heavy bronze, dominated the vast plains with absolute supremacy. Hittites, Mycenaeans, and Egyptians controlled a highly connected and complex global trade network. According to ancient clay tablets, peace treaties and royal marriages kept this wealthy world secure. But the climate began to change drastically, bringing decades of severe drought and terrible famine. Golden crops withered beneath the brutal scorching sun, and once fertile valleys turned into barren wastelands. From across the darkening horizon, a massive fleet of crude wooden ships appeared on the sea. They were not a unified army, but a desperate coalition of refugees seeking survival. Modern historians call them the Sea Peoples, a mysterious force of men, women, and crying youth. They carried their entire lives in rickety wooden carts, pulled by exhausted and skeletal oxen. These nameless wanderers were driven by the most primitive instinct, the absolute human need to eat. To the proud Bronze Age generals, this massive migrant wave looked like a weak and disorganized mob. Royal commanders laughed at the invaders, confident their elite troops would quickly decimate them all. They ordered heavy chariots to form massive lines, preparing for a glorious and very easy victory. Bright sunlight gleamed perfectly off their heavy bronze shields, while war horses stomped the ground with restless energy. The Sea Peoples, however, did not flinch or retreat when they saw the magnificent war machines. Instead of showing fear, their deeply scarred faces twisted into expressions of pure, hungry rage. They possessed absolutely nothing but ragged leather armor, woven shields, and long, straight, iron-tipped swords. As the mighty chariots charged forward, the earth shook violently beneath the deafening sound of hooves. The old world expected a traditional battle, where honorable formations clashed on flat terrain. Yet the Sea Peoples fiercely refused to play by the established rules of civilized and noble warfare. They sprinted directly into the treacherous muddy swamps and rocky hillsides near the coastal beaches. The proud Bronze Age generals realized too late that their heavy war machines could not maneuver there. Their massive chariot wheels sank deep into the sticky mud, neutralizing their greatest royal weapon. Stuck and vulnerable, the elite soldiers became easy targets for the agile, lightly armed foes. The Sea Peoples swarmed over the trapped chariots like a massive colony of angry, destructive ants. Using their long, heavy swords, they viciously stabbed through the unprotected gaps in the royal bronze armor. They threw deadly javelins to cripple the majestic war horses, bringing the mighty beasts crashing down. The screams of dying horses mixed with the terrifying, primal war cries of the desperate invaders. Crimson stains and deep mud quickly covered the once gleaming armor of the panicked chariot commanders. The rigid formations of the old world shattered completely under this chaotic guerrilla war. If you faced an enemy with absolutely nothing to lose but their lives, how would you defend your home? Traditional military tactics that had won countless wars were suddenly rendered completely useless. Heavy bronze armor, originally designed to deflect arrows, only slowed the royal soldiers down in the mud. The Sea Peoples fought with a savage intensity that professional ancient armies had never witnessed. They did not take any prisoners or demand ransoms because they had no extra food to feed captives. Every single encounter turned into a tragic ruin, a pure fight for the right to breathe and eat. Panic spread rapidly through the royal ranks as they watched their invincible generals fall in the dirt. Surviving soldiers dropped their heavy tower shields and desperately fled toward their vast walled cities. Yet the hungry horde relentlessly chased them, a massive tide of human misery that could not be stopped. According to surviving Hittite letters, kings begged their neighbors for urgent military assistance. They wrote highly desperate pleas on clay tablets, stating that the enemy ships had burned their coastal towns. However, no help ever arrived because every single empire fought its own apocalyptic battle. The intricate web of global trade completely collapsed, entirely cutting off the vital supply of copper. Without essential copper and tin, the great kingdoms could not forge new weapons to replace the ones they lost.
The Sea Peoples pushed deeper inland, leaving a horrifying trail of smoke, dark ash, and absolute ruin. They bypassed the heavily fortified castles, choosing instead to ravage undefended farming villages. The agricultural backbone of the Bronze Age system was systematically destroyed within a few short years. Royal troops, hiding behind massive stone walls, slowly began to starve as their vital food supplies ran out. The Sea Peoples did not even need siege engines. They simply let famine do the deadly work for them. They boldly camped outside the majestic cities, roasting stolen cattle while the kings starved on their thrones. The mighty cyclopean walls of Mycenae, built with giant stones, offered no protection against hunger. Internal rebellions erupted within the starving cities as desperate citizens turned on their royal rulers. The Sea Peoples merely waited for the gates to open from the inside, letting chaos consume the elite. When they finally stormed the palaces, they showed absolutely no mercy to the wealthy and powerful. Golden treasures and exquisite artifacts were carelessly smashed to pieces and melted down for scrap. The fierce invaders were not interested in ruling these complex societies. They only wanted stored grain. Beautiful frescoes depicting glorious victories were blackened by the thick smoke of raging infernos. The old world order, built over centuries of diplomacy, was violently erased in a sea of fire. Imagine the absolute terror of watching everything you know reduced to completely meaningless ashes. The great Hittite Empire, once the most feared superpower in the region, simply ceased to exist. Their magnificent capital city, Hattusa, was abandoned and burned to the ground by the fierce invaders. The Sea Peoples moved like a terrifying force of nature, an unstoppable plague of hungry locusts. They brought their families into the conquered lands, replacing the vanquished locals with their very own kin. The incredibly proud generals of the ancient world were reduced to broken men, kneeling in the dirt and crying. Their dented bronze armor became a heavy symbol of their spectacular failure to protect their own people. Meanwhile, the Sea People's fierce chieftains stood triumphantly on the smoking ruins, roaring at the dark sky. Their gaunt bodies, covered in black soot and crimson stains, looked like terrifying demons born from the raging fire. The refugees swarmed the royal granaries, frantically stuffing their mouths with stolen wheat and fresh barley. For the first time in many years, the desperate migrants finally had enough food to feed their hungry children. But their survival came at the ultimate cost of plunging humanity into a terrifying age of chaos. Writing systems were entirely forgotten, as the scribes who kept the ancient records were silenced forever. Knowledge of engineering, astronomy, and complex administration vanished beneath the heavy stone rubble. Centuries of human progress were instantly wiped out, leaving only myth and legend for future descendants. Does extreme desperation justify the destruction of civilization? Or is survival the only truth? The Mediterranean coast, once bustling with wealthy merchant ships, became a silent graveyard of grand empires. The Sea Peoples continued their relentless march southward, destroying the wealthy Canaanite coastal cities. City after city fell like dominoes, names slowly forgotten beneath thick layers of ash and dark sand. Archaeological evidence of this destruction is clear. Thick burn layers mark the violent end of an era. Eventually, this massive, unstoppable wave of human misery reached the very borders of the Egyptian realm. Egypt was the last remaining superpower, possessing vast wealth and a highly organized military force. The pharaoh knew exactly what was coming, hearing the terrifying rumors from the devastated north. He gathered every single soldier, archer, and heavy chariot, preparing for the ultimate fight for survival. The confident Egyptian scribes carved boastful words onto their temple walls, claiming the gods would always protect them. But deep down, the royal commanders were terrified of the ragged, starving horde approaching their lands. The Sea Peoples launched a massive, coordinated attack from both the harsh desert and the dangerous sea. Thousands of primitive wooden ships sailed toward the Nile Delta, filled with ferocious, desperate armed men. The disciplined Egyptian archers lined the muddy shores, their bows drawn tight, waiting for the order to unleash hell. As the enemy fleet entered the shallow waters, the sky turned entirely black, with a deadly rain of sharp arrows. The heavily armored Egyptian infantry stood their ground, determined to protect their sacred homeland. The clash that followed was the most brutal and desperate conflict the ancient world had ever witnessed. The water of the Nile Delta quickly turned a deep, horrific shade of red, as thousands of desperate men perished. Ships collided, splintering into pieces, while soldiers engaged in brutal face-to-face combat in the thick mud. The survival of the entire civilized world depended entirely on the outcome of this chaotic battle. Pharaoh Ramesses III orchestrated a truly brilliant defense, using the treacherous Nile River swamps. He trapped the crude enemy ships in narrow channels, where they could not escape the deadly flying arrows. The mighty Sea Peoples, who had destroyed the entire ancient world, were stopped in the muddy river waters. Thousands of fierce warriors were quickly captured, their hands bound tightly as they kneeled on the crimson riverbanks. The great pharaoh stood victorious, looking down at the broken invaders with absolute majesty. However, his weary eyes revealed the devastating dark truth behind this incredibly costly royal triumph. Egypt somehow survived the terrifying storm, but the long, brutal war had completely drained its royal treasury. The complex global trade network was permanently shattered, completely leaving the victorious kingdom starving. This massive, brutal conflict marked the definitive end of the magnificent and wealthy Bronze Age. The ancient empires crumbled into ash, plunging humanity into a terrifying, lawless Dark Age. Even the mighty Egyptian kingdom would never truly recover from this catastrophic event. The era of living gods and grand stone palaces faded away, replaced by survival, and extreme hardship. The descendants of the Sea Peoples eventually settled along the coast, becoming Philistines. Out of the smoking ashes of the ruined Old World, the new Iron Age would slowly and painfully emerge. History was brutally rewritten by a starving horde who just wanted to feed their hungry children. There are no permanent empires, only the ruthless cycle of building, burning, and rebuilding. The ancient world fell not to a massive army, but to the unstoppable force of true desperation. Did the Sea Peoples destroy the ancient world out of malice, or were they desperate climate victims? Leave your thoughts below. Was their brutal invasion totally justified by the massive need to survive? Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more epic historical deep dives into the past.